According to leaked reports, there is a mysterious general who is commanding North Korean troops in Kursk. But just what are they doing there? And who is this guy? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this is a really interesting story from Meduza, one of the only independent news outlets in Russia. And what is being reported is that Colonel General Kim Bok is the mysterious commander of this North Korean contingent in Russia. And there's a whole bunch about him that is interesting, but what's almost more interesting is what we don't know. Now, what's interesting is that North Korean news, right? This is again an independent outlet that covers North Korea. Initially reported that Kim Bok had taken charge of the troops in Russia, but what's more interesting, again, is that of the 11,000 troops there, they estimate that there are around 500 officers, which actually is a fairly high concentration of officers by sort of Soviet-era military standards, right? That's one officer for every 20 troops. Fairly high, but what I strongly suspect is that these officers are there in greater numbers to perform specialty roles, for example, operating air defenses, or to sort of train them, right? So you might have 200 core officers, and then you may have an additional, 300 who are going to be learning about Russian operations so that they can command or train subsequent contingents of North Koreans that arrive. But this is a pretty complex operation, and the most interesting part about Mr. or Colonel General Bok is that he was in charge of North Korea's special forces. Now, this is much larger than Western special forces and are much broader in mandate. They consist of about 200,000 members. And what's fascinating is that in North Korea, the military elite are, they describe them as celebrities. I think it would be more apt to say that they are the ruling class, right? This is a country where every single male has 10 years of military service. So really, the military is the core institution of life in North Korea. So again, you're looking at generals effectively functioning as the all of the government bureaucracy combined. Because remember, if you're a man, think about everything that happened in your life between 18 and 30, right? It was a lot. And that is essentially that phase of every Korean man's life, North Korean man's life, is dominated by the military. So generals are considered celebrities, but what makes Bok unique is that he isn't, right? And while he has very little public appearances, he hides his identity as much as he possibly can. But what's also sort of interesting is that he's regularly photographed in very close proximity to the leader Kim Jong-un. And this is not insignificant, right? In Soviet and Chinese kind of politics, the proximity to a leader is seen as a symbol of their favor. And you can see in these two photographs, this one from October 2nd and this one from October 27th, right? So very recent photographs depict General Bok in extreme proximity to Kim Jong-un, right? And it's really fascinating to see how proximate he is demonstrated as being, right? They also report that this is essentially after he really rose to public prominence after signing their deal with North Korea and Russia signed their sort of mutual cooperation agreement. And this has made him kind of unveil himself, so to speak, in the public. And again, I think part of the symbols here is to show Russia that DPRK troops are being led by someone who Kim Jong-un views as highly trustworthy. Because we know that a lot of dictators, well, they often will get rid of potentially problematic generals. And by problematic, I mean generals likely to stage a coup, by locating them as far away from the main country as possible. This is famously sort of what backfired for Spain during their civil war in the 30s when Franco was actually assigned to Morocco and in command of a Spanish-Moroccan army. But in fact, that ended up backfiring because when he came back to Spain to overthrow the government, he had a deeply loyal army, including a large number of Moroccans who didn't speak any Spanish at all and really weren't even sure what was going on. So what's interesting is that the South Koreans, maintain a database of all the high-ranking North Korean military officials, but Kim Bok's profile has only a first and last name, date, place of birth, and biographical information. South Koreans have not been able to find it, right? And other than his appointment to the head of Special Forces literally 10 years ago, there's not much known about the guy. Of course, you can see that he routinely appears very close to the supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. But it's, again, I think a sign that for the Russians, they're getting one of their best guys. In fact, they actually had a North Korea expert from the Smithsonian Institute quote in the Wall Street Journal. He said, Kim Jong-un is telling the Russians, I'm sending one of my best guys. He sits right next to me, which is, I think, a pretty good summation of it. Now, let's talk about what the North Korean troops are up to and why they need the Special Forces general in charge. But, of course, if you want to see some of the combat, including, we're seeing more and more purported instances of North Korean troops in combat, you're going to want to do that over on combatthatnews.com. You guys know that I don't get many sponsors here because of the nature of my content, so I depend on you guys to keep me independent and able to do this, right? I'm not one of those influencers that's for sale. And so if you guys want me to continue to go out, get the best stories possible, including stories literally directly from the front lines, then you want to become a member, right? Over on combatthatnews.com, link is in the description. Pick up your tiers, get access to hundreds of uncensored combat videos dating back to the start of the war. It's really one of the best archives of good quality combat footage. Now, and the link is in the description. Okay. So according to the South Koreans, right, this is where things get weird. South Koreans are saying that North Korean troops have joined Ukraine war battles as part of Russian units and are participating, right, as part of Russia's airborne and marine units. And some soldiers have already participated in battles in the war, right? That North Korea is also shipping weapons like self-propelled howitzers and multiple rocket launcher systems to Russia. But more significant is that there's also reports, again, from the South Koreans who said that there was actually a meeting between North Korea's foreign minister and Russia's Vladimir Putin, but they said it was unusual in terms of protocol. Oftentimes, these kind of meetings are highly structured in order to avoid offense, avoid implying or revealing any information. And so the fact that it was unusual in terms of protocol, it says that it likely means that this was an actual working meeting, not just a symbolic cooperation visit, right? So, but the American military, again, being much less willing to confirm what's going on with North Korean troops, simply acknowledging that while they have no evidence that those North Koreans have engaged in combat with Ukrainian troops in Kursk, they said the North Korean troops are moving into Kursk for a reason, and we have every expectation that they're going to be engaged in combat operations. But right, the U.S. views North Korea and Russia as co-belligerents in this, which is a very interesting change of statement. Right, North Korean troops entering Russia last month. So this is really sort of interesting because, again, the U.S. acknowledging them as co-belligerents, right? It's one of those things where when people say, "Oh, we're moving towards World War III," and a lot of times people blame the United States, right? They say, "Oh, well, why does the U.S. keep escalating the conflict?" But at the end of the day, the U.S. does not have troops fighting. In fact, there are only 3 countries with large numbers of official troops fighting, and that is Russia, Ukraine, and North Korea. And so only Russia has expanded this war to include a 3rd country, an Asian country, actually. So again, in terms of who's trying to turn this into a world war, it seems very overwhelming that it's Putin. And the reason is because Putin thinks he can win. He thinks with the aid of North Koreans, he can actually win. This is effectively the war feels like it's become both appeasement, where where not angering the dictator is the most important thing, and training. Effectively, the Russian military has been trained in a piecemeal kind of way to counter one U.S. weapon system at a time. And so now every U.S. rival is looking to Russia and saying, wow, you guys are able to beat the Western military structure. You have to teach us how to do this. And that's, I think, why North Korea has sent their best general to the front lines, because ultimately he is going to be best positioned to learn about how the ultimate question. Because remember, the South Korean military also mirrors in a lot of ways the U.S. military, who's been their partner for literally 70 years. And so the North Koreans are saying, listen, Russia, which has a Soviet-style system and is on a tight budget, is able to beat a Western-backed military, organized, trained, and fighting in a Western style. And they say, if you can teach us how to do that, we will give you the troops you need. So the troops are going to be expendable. They're probably not going to be coming home. But that general and his key staff, they are expected to be learning everything, like a sponge, learning as much as they can from the Russian way of war, so that when North Korea decides to unify the peninsula, they can do so. And don't kid yourself, right? I think that watching this has given every single dictatorship with hope that they can beat back the West and seize territory from one of their allies on a relatively low budget, right? Again, Russia is not that well. The Russian economy is working quite hard to take Ukraine. They really aren't that big, and especially relative to the West. So, but what dictatorships have, is commitment. They are willing to kill a lot of people and pour a lot of their national resources into these fights in a way that the West just isn't. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M. I just got to call all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.